Hey, and welcome back to True Crime This Week with me, your host, James Renner. Hey, usually, as you know, this show is devoted to bringing you all the latest true crime news you may have missed during the week. But today's episode will cover new information in the disappearance of Maura Murray. I'm going to return next Friday morning with our regularly scheduled programming. But I want to bring in this special episode. There's a lot that happened today. 24 hours ago, I thought this was going to be a normal podcast, and then things happened. I've actually been away for a couple weeks. I just got back from a tour around the Midwest for my new true crime book, Scout Camp. I visited Des Moines, St. Louis, Tulsa, Wichita, which is why I haven't been doing the show for 2 weeks, and was ready to get back to business as usual. But yesterday morning, I got a call from a source close to the investigation of Maura Murray. The story I'm about to tell you is a little twisty, it's a little complicated, and it's very new, so I'm going to do my best to walk you through it, but here's the headline. A fingerprint found inside Maura Murray's car has been linked to former West Point cadet Stefan Baldwin, who was sentenced to 15 and a half years in prison on unrelated charges in Ohio yesterday. In fact, an investigator for the New Hampshire State Police once referred to Stefan as his number one suspect. Here's what I've been able to piece together in the last 24 hours. I'm going to start with the crimes in Ohio and then show you how Stefan connects to Maura Murray. Back in 2012, Stefan Baldwin was appointed as a humane agent for Union County, Ohio. That's in a rural part of Ohio outside of Columbus. Part of his job was investigating animal cruelty cases for the county. But even though he was an official agent of Union County, he really worked for a nonprofit he created known as the Animal Cruelty Task Force, or ACT for short. He had a badge and legal authority and all that good stuff. Stefan also served as a board member for the Logan County Humane Society and was the former director of the Top of Ohio Pet Shelter. Stefan ran his nonprofit out of a few locations in Union County, including his home. ACT's mission was to take in dogs with behavioral issues, dogs that had gotten in trouble for biting people and were at risk for being put down, and Stefan would train them and then place them with their new forever homes. Perhaps he even really did that for a time, but then the dogs began to disappear. When owners called to check on their dogs, Stefan would tell them that the dog had already been placed for adoption, but then he could not provide any information about where they ended up, and he could show no documentation related to the adoptions. Long story short, what Stefan was really doing was euthanizing the dogs when their funding ran out in order to make space for new dogs and new money. And that money that was supposed to go back into the nonprofit and the care of the dogs ended up going into his pocket. By the time the truth came out, Stefan had needlessly euthanized at least 18 dogs in Ohio and possibly as many as 100 cats. Stefan told one couple that he could get their dog removed from this list of dangerous animals in exchange for $1,000. He pocketed the money and killed their dog, and then lied to them for several months, saying their pet was really doing well. When Stefan learned he was being investigated, he fled to California, where he started up a new nonprofit and began killing dogs again. He was eventually apprehended by U.S. Marshals who posed as potential customers and brought back to Ohio, where he was charged with 43 felonies in 2020. Charges included cruelty to companion animals, grand theft, bribery, telecommunications fraud, tampering with evidence, and impersonating a peace officer. Once Stefan was arrested, police took his fingerprints and entered the fingerprints into APHIS. That's the national database for fingerprints that's used by law enforcement around the country. And here's where we get to Maura Murray. Shortly after they entered his prints into APHIS, New Hampshire State Police Cold Case Unit Detective Charles West contacted police in Ohio. Stefan's fingerprints had hit on evidence they had in the disappearance of Maura Murray. At the time, West considered Stefan the lead suspect in the case. West was making plans to come to Ohio to interview Stefan when he abruptly quit the cold case unit due in part to the drama caused by so-called advocates who were working with the Murray family. For those who somehow have not heard about this case, Maura Murray was an accomplished runner from Hanson, Massachusetts. After graduating high school, she attended West Point, but got in trouble there for stealing items from the commissary at Fort Knox. She went in front of a judicial review board who found her responsible for conduct unbecoming a cadet. She was going to be kicked out of West Point, but shortly before her official sentencing, they allowed her to withdraw to keep that off her record. Maura then enrolled at UMass Amherst. She got in trouble there too. In 2003, she was caught using a stolen credit card and went before a judge there, who told her that her record would be wiped clean if she could just stay out of trouble for 6 months. On Monday, February 9, 2004, Maura emailed her professors saying that there had been a death in her family and that she would return to campus soon. That was a lie. No death in the family. She went to her bank and emptied her account, just like a little over $200. Then she went to a liquor store and bought way too much booze for one person. Then she drove north into the White Mountains of New Hampshire, where she crashed into a snowbank around 7:30 p.m. People who lived near the accident site called the police, but sometime between the crash and when the first officer arrived, a window of somewhere between 5 and 7 minutes, Maura vanished, never to be seen again. There is, of course, a lot more to that story. I wrote a whole book about the case called True Crime Addict, which goes into greater detail, but that's about the sum of it. So back to Stefan, whose fingerprints were found in Maura's car after police dusted it for prints. How is he connected to Maura? Stefan attended West Point too. In fact, he was the student who represented Maura at the Judicial Review Board hearing. He was also in a relationship with Maura for some time before Maura met her boyfriend Bill Rausch. And Stefan left West Point within a week of when Maura withdrew. My source describes Stefan's unique personality and colorful language. Quote, he's a sociopath, end quote, they said. Quote, obsessive in his relationships, abusive to his girlfriend, and has a dissociative identity disorder, end quote. Dissociative identity disorder is what we used to call multiple personality disorder. To be more blunt, they referred to Stefan as a serial killer of dogs. They went on to say that Stefan was prone to bouts of mania, including one instance where he left his dogs behind to drive 10 hours to see his girlfriend. I was given this information yesterday morning, just a couple hours before Stefan was due to be sentenced for his crimes in Union County. It's a 2-hour drive from my house, and I arrived just before it all started. As luck would have it, Stefan was waiting outside the courtroom, and I got a short interview with him. Stefan told me that he dated Maura for a while at West Point, saying, quote, I really cared for her, end quote. Once he actually got in trouble for having Maura in his room at West Point because I guess there they have this rule where you're not allowed to share a horizontal surface with a member of the opposite sex. And then one day when they were on a bus, Maura chose to sit next to Bill Rausch instead of him. And that's when he realized that she had started dating Bill. He says he represented Maura in front of another judicial review board after Maura was found passed out on the lawn at West Point, suffering from alcohol poisoning. Those are his words. He claims her friends dumped her there and ran away to avoid getting in trouble themselves. Stefan says he only learned about Maura's disappearance after seeing an episode of Maury Povich. He says he never heard of my book. I asked him about the fingerprints, and Stefan said he was interviewed by the FBI last spring in 2024. But he says the fingerprint was found on a CD inside the car. He says, quote, we used to trade CDs in college. That's why my print was on it, end quote. He claims he was never in her car and never saw her again after he left West Point. He says he has never been further north than Connecticut. Stefan even forwarded me an email he sent to the FBI after that initial interview. I'm going to read it for you here. Special Agent Logan. Good afternoon. I hope this email finds you well. Since we last spoke, I spent a little bit of time looking into the details around Maura's disappearance and trying to think of anything that might be even the slightest bit relevant. I admittedly never looked into Maura's case too much just because I always had that little twinge of disappointment in how the relationship ended. I mentioned the group of upperclassmen when you were here who took Maura out and got her so drunk that she passed out on a front lawn, and they left her there to deal with the disciplinary repercussions. I'm not positive at all, but it sounds like the boyfriend she was dating when she disappeared was part of that same group of upperclassmen, and all I can say is that anyone who would leave a 19-year-old girl passed out drunk and completely vulnerable can't be a decent person. I wish I had names for you. All I can say is that there should be disciplinary records in her files from that incident, and hopefully it would mention anyone else who was involved that night. I don't know how wide the net has been casting around her boyfriend, but I got the sense that the group he hung out with at West Point was really tight, so maybe they know something or would be worth speaking to. The only other thought I have, and this is a bigger stretch, but at 20 years, I guess any thought is worth mentioning. There was a fifth-year senior during the 2001-2002 year at West Point who was obsessed with Maura. I wanted to say Chris was his name. I can't be positive on that, but I know that there weren't many fifth-year seniors, so hopefully it's not too hard to nail that individual down. He had been following Maura around a lot at school, and I only know that because he burst into my room one night when Maura and I were together, and we both got a lot of demerits for sharing that horizontal space. When I asked Maura how this upperclassman knew she was in my room, she basically said that he had been stalking her, but was pretty dismissive about the whole thing. I can't imagine she ever gave him the time of day, and I don't know what happened to him, and I'm not even sure what his name was, but as I think about anything that might be helpful, those are the two thoughts I could come up with. To help narrow him down beyond a fifth-year senior, possibly named Chris, I would hope that our disciplinary records might show who turned us in that night. I know this isn't your case, but I wish you all the very best figuring out what happened. I don't know if I can be of any more assistance, but I am just a phone call away. Stefan Baldwin. The question becomes, after all this, the question is Stefan lying about seeing Maura after leaving West Point? Is he lying about how his fingerprint got on the CD in her car? I don't know. But the one thing we do know about Stefan is that he is a master manipulator and a compulsive liar, as was evident during the victim impact statements that were read in court prior to his sentencing yesterday. One woman named Alex said, quote, "No one should have to encounter the monster that Baldwin is ever again. He deserves to rot in prison for the rest of his life," end quote. A woman named Tish said, quote, "He conned every human into believing him. His deception caused immense suffering," end quote. A woman named Linda said, quote, "He was and is a master manipulator and could make other people believe whatever he wanted them to believe. His actions were not one-off, it was habitual, and he hid things with a smile on his face. I believe there are more lies that we are not aware of," end quote. A veterinarian named Michelle Gonzalez said, quote, "He is someone who has no empathy, no ability to care for others. I want you to consider his lack of remorse," end quote. A woman named Lisa said, quote, "He always thought he was smarter than everyone else. He has psychopathic tendencies. He has no emotion, no compassion for victims, human or animal," end quote. In the end, the judge sentenced Stefan to 15 and a half years in prison for his crimes, and now he will have to submit his DNA. I'm still processing everything I learned today, but there are a couple things that I'm reminded of. A couple years ago, I learned that Maura's boyfriend, Bill Rausch, accessed her voicemail after she disappeared, and in doing so, learned that Maura had hooked up with a guy at a UMass party the weekend before she went missing. And very early on, I'm talking like 20 years ago, there was a popular rumor floating around message boards devoted to the case about the man Maura left the party with that night. Here's a screenshot of an old post on mydeathspace.com. At the time, the rumor was that this man's name was Stefanos. I've also seen him just called Stefan, S-T-E-F-A-N. Stefan Baldwin spells it S-T-E-F-F-E-N. I'm very interested. I'm very interested to know if Stefan was ever at UMass or in New Hampshire. Here's what he looked like around that time. Feel free to email me directly at jameswrenner@gmail.com. And if you have any information helpful to the case, contact the Cold Case Unit with the New Hampshire State Police. That's the new info. I'm interested to see where it goes, what other leads it might kick up. I will be back next week, Friday morning, wherever you get your podcast, True Crime This Week. I'll be back here with the true crime news you might have missed during that week. We'll get back to regular programming. But thank you for listening to this update in the Maura Murray case, and we'll see you soon. True Crime This Week is a Fearful Symmetry production. Photo and artwork are licensed through Shutterstock. If you like the cut of my jib, I have another podcast you might enjoy called The Philosophy of Crime, in which I attempt to solve the big questions behind our true crime obsession by looking to philosophy for answers. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week. Sit, Brownie, sit. Good dog.